Well, Jim, thank you so much for joining me today.
Glad to be here. I am happy to be on the air talking about just life. Life is pretty okay
Yeah.
right now, and I'm glad to celebrate it with others.
That's amazing. Listen, we have so much to talk about. I have so many questions about, your time with Hootie and the Blowfish and what you've done since. But maybe most importantly, for the purpose of this conversation, is about healing, like the healing journey, the spiritual aspect of, recovery and how you have experienced that. I'm so curious to hear about your experience with all of that. But maybe we could just start with some of the fun stuff. Like, when I was doing my research and we were talking about, I was like, wow, 2 Grammy Awards. And I'm sure you've seen all this stuff on Wikipedia. It's like, oh, you played alongside Dave Matthews Band and REM and even Willie Nelson, like all these really cool people. As a young man, that must have been such a surreal experience for you.
Well, the journey starts out by, trying to work our way as young adults through, dreams that we've had as younger persons. And for me, it was about a dream that ended. I had all intents, all intent purposes of coming to the University of South Carolina to spend 4 years playing Division I soccer and maybe even continuing on. I was not much thinking about the academic side of life. I wanted to get, away from where I grew up in the Midwest and come south, where we had a little bit of family down here in South Carolina. And I put everything into soccer. I traveled a long distance and was not invited or recruited, and took a chance, and it worked out great. And so, a mere 6 years later, I was picking up a degree, but my soccer career was over. And
Mm.
sort of at a crossroads of, I want to be creative. Soccer was always creative and physical to me. I loved working with others, even as self-centered as I could be at times. I sort of went over, I shifted gears and moved over into music. And I just started slowly realizing how important that was to me, uh, from growing up as a listener and then a drummer. And then by the end of college, I was starting to write songs on guitar and piano as well. And, it's so for me, it was about what my dad told me growing up: have options if you can. If you can possibly have an option, that would be a great thing. And I did. Soccer was done, and I shifted into music while I was trying to gain my degree. And in the great timing of the universe, I run into three like-minded guys in 1989 who are also finishing up their time at the university, and they want to write songs. They already have a band called Hootie and the Blowfish, and they're looking for a new drummer. And I tell them I can drum and I can sing background vocals and I can write. I hadn't written much great at the time, I'll say that, but when they asked me if I had any original material, I certainly brought in the song I was most proud of, which was called Hold My Hand, which comes into play at the beginning during my audition, and then has legs and lasts down the road to more important times. So we just in 1989 decided we're going to put all our efforts and joy and what little sort of music education we had into writing songs and sort of getting a following down here in the Southeast.
That's amazing. And then tell me the story about how you got your big break with David Letterman.
Well, we worked our tails off for about 5 years.
5 years.
We were a 5 year overnight success, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Better than
You know,
10. You keep hearing it's a 10-year success.
well, we got lucky then. I think all of us had been in music a little while, playing in different bands. So to be fair, it probably was more like 10,
Yeah.
all in all. But yeah, we had been working. We'd been making our original music, selling it at shows. As you mentioned, Dave Matthews, that was a band who we would run across because we were in the same circuit. We were guys that sort of started in a college town, knew that the college towns on the Southeast and the East Coast were vibrant with listeners who wanted to hear new music. And we were willing to travel as much as we could. And so we saw bands like Dave Matthews along the way doing the same thing, playing, playing parties that might pay a few extra bucks so we could get money to go in the studio and make our original music, which we would then sell at our other gigs. And after 5 years, we had a pretty good following. We were organized. We had a van. We had insurance. I mean, we had our own merchandise. We
Wow.
were kind of like
Insurance.
maybe a little too organized for a rock band. Maybe we needed to party harder. But we got signed by Atlantic, and honestly, a record deal back in the 90s or 80s or 70s did not always signify like success. It meant you had a chance to record for an influential label who might get you on radio, who might put your records in stores. But we saw a lot of bands that got to that point, recorded their big debut album, and then you never heard from them again. So we were, and that's how we started. We released in the summer of 94, and 2 months later, we were, hovering between 150 and 200 on the top charts. We weren't going in the right direction either. And I like to say luck is where preparation meets opportunity. And in late August of 94, with our album going down the charts, we got really lucky. David Letterman heard our song, Hold My Hand, that we had written 5 years earlier on the radio station up in New York, and got us on his show. And that changed it. 3.5 minutes later, the first domino tips of a long row of dominoes that were set up. And suddenly, we have, fans. Instead of playing to 200 or 300 fans a night, we're sitting in front of 5 million of David Letterman's audience for 3.5 minutes. And they, I guess, liked it.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, because then you want to go on to win a couple Grammys and just experience all the success. What was it like right after the David Letterman show? Was it just, were you guys flooded with opportunities and feedback?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I said, like, signing a record deal and making a record is not really guaranteeing anything. We saw the results of being on Letterman pretty quick. So suddenly radio stations are adding our single Hold My Hand all across America. Suddenly we're getting an opportunity to be an opening act on a theater tour outside of our region in the Midwest, where we had never been before, with Big Head Todd and the Monsters. You might remember from the 90s too. And so it's opportunity. It's opportunity and influence. We're making a music video and then another music video. Then we get a chance at a second single. I think Let Her Cry was the second one. And that shot up the charts as well. And so suddenly you have all this momentum, and we go into 95, and we have a #1 album by May of 95. We're headlining our first amphitheater tour in the United States by June. And, you pinch yourself, and it looks like momentum, and it looks like you've worked hard for it. It didn't feel artificial by any means, but
right.
For anybody that wasn't in the Southeast wondering what's a Hootie and the Blowfish, they probably thought we'd just been born the day before. So we were a new sensation in that regard.
Yeah, it's funny how people's perceptions are. If it's something new to them, they think it's new to everyone.
Yeah.
People are funny. Well, that's amazing. And did you guys tell me a little bit about I want to hear about what it was like to win a Grammy. That must have been amazing. Was that, you won 2 Grammys? Was that at the same time, like in the same year?
Yeah, it was the 96 Grammy Awards, which represented, 1995 sales. So there was a bunch of suddenly this season of awards shows that we were on: MTV Awards, ASCAP, Billboard, America, what's it called? All these award shows. And so since we had done so well in 95, this was sort of the tail end of this. Now, at the same time, weirdly, we were getting a lot of backlash. We had almost oversaturated the market. People that didn't like Hootie and the Blowfish hated Hootie and the Blowfish because we were on every magazine, and we just couldn't be slowed down. And I don't know, people poke fun at the name, and they just think because you sell too many records, you're not legitimate. And that was a hard place for us, but we weathered through it and released our second album pretty quick, and then a third. And before a blink of an eye, the 90s are sort of behind us. We had 3 platinum records.
Wow.
Tracked Rear View, the biggest one, really is the one that was the foundation, and we were able to, at that point, sort of call the shots. But also, it's the music business. So the next cool band with tighter jeans and cooler sounds they're waiting to take over the top of the charts, and we kind of get pushed aside. And by the early 2000s, it's not looking as rosy as it was in 1995. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Hopefully you
Time
invested your money
changes.
well.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You hope you saved your money, but we were fighting to figure out who we were and how we would continue without the support of radio and our new records. We were also going through a lot of internal changes in the band. That's what happens. What we all face in life as time goes by. We had split with our manager. We weren't on good terms with our record label. Part of the band moved down to the coast, and it just didn't, feel like we were on great footing anymore. And maybe that's what a entertainment career looks like. You get 5 years, or a sports career, you get 5 good years. You hope you save your money, like you said, and you cross your fingers. And so that's kind of where we were by the early 2000s, and we didn't quite know what to do with ourselves.
Yeah, I would imagine that's quite a shift in identity. And speaking of shifts in identity, we're here to talk about your journey through the good times and the bad. I know that you're in recovery, and you've been in recovery for a while now. 18 years, is that right? In recovery? Yeah, that's amazing. That's right. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're like a full-fledged adult now in the recovery.
Right. One day I'm going to grow up.
I hope not. I don't know what that means. It sounds terrible, being an adult. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about kind of how we got here. Obviously there was lots of good times, and I was, going through some of your book, Swimming with a Blowfish, Hootie, Healing, and One Hell of a Ride. And it's people drink for two things, because they want to celebrate, or because maybe because they're sad. And from what I read, it sounded like, and I'll let you tell the story, but was drinking part of your coping mechanism to deal with all the attention, whether it's praise or criticism?
No, I didn't struggle with the attention. My drinking had different patterns in different parts of my life. And so I started when I was 14, and it added a chemical to, a developing brain like mine, who was into sports and interested in girls and interested in music. These things are already difficult to sort of manage as a 14-year-old. But then for the first time ever, knowing it was illegal and unlawful and dangerous, I saw kids my age using drugs and alcohol, and I wanted the thrill. I definitely was one that was attracted to it because I was curious. I saw sort of that it might be signifying that I was an adult if I tried this, because I saw other adults using it. And it wasn't that I was socially awkward. I wanted to fit in with these new kids that were going to be freshmen at this big public high school that I was entering, going from a school that had, a couple hundred kids to a couple thousand. Might have been part of my wanting to be accepted, but I knew it was wrong and dangerous, but I also wanted this thrill. I had this sort of deviant thing where I wanted to try something that I knew was a little illegal, and I liked sort of the punching at authority a little bit. So we were always running from the police anyway at that age, getting away with stuff. Alcohol felt like a natural thing, but looking back, it was a change for me. It was where I definitely was doing something I liked, and I was definitely hiding it. So music I liked, but I didn't have to hide it. Sports I loved, didn't have to hide it. But now suddenly I'm doing something that I'm putting a lot of effort and attention into, but I'm having to hide it from any adult figures because I want them to believe I'm some good kid. And I did that through high school. I did it through college. I had consequences, relationally, and occasionally, it's like a roller coaster with the highs that I was seeking and experimenting with. You got to come down. And so I had a lot of lows, and I always brushed by them like, I'm not arrested. I'm not in the back of a cop car. Then I'm okay. Or I'm not the worst guy here. Then I'm probably in the middle of the pack. I don't have a problem. So I never looked at it. And then, the years of working hard in the band, the 5 years of before fame, and then the 5 years of fame, even then, yeah, sure, I would get in trouble every now and then, and I did it a little more regularly because we were everyone's big night out. We played 5 shows a week regularly. And so when you go from, Tuscaloosa to Atlanta to DC to Delaware, I would party every night because I was so excited about our career taking off. It was like, so it became a pattern and I couldn't see it, but it was still mostly just kind of partying with alcohol, and it wasn't too much hard stuff. And I think, to answer your question fully, where I started struggling is on the way down. Here we were, obviously looking, and you could see our best years that were behind us. And I didn't know what to do about that. I didn't like it, but I didn't know how to, I guess, interpret it or say, God, how do I face this honestly? This fear and a slight punctured pride as well. We were the big thing. When you're the big thing, you think you're always going to be the big thing. You're at the top and you think this could last 20 years. And here it was 5 years later, and we were clawing our way, and we weren't going to get back up. And so I had a pattern starting at that time. And yeah, what does alcohol represent in our society? Of course, we celebrate. It's about a victory. It's about an accomplishment, 40 hard work hours in a week, or an award, or a victory on the playing field. And since I didn't want to face the reality that our career was going downwards, I dragged that celebration from the 90s forward. And I was the guy who, you never got a night off with me. If we had a night off in Kansas City, I got the whole crew and the band, and we went bowling and we partied. And if we had a night off in Albuquerque, I did the same thing. I felt like if we were celebrating and having fun, that represented that our career was moving in the right direction. And that's just that's a coping mechanism, if you will, which was your original thought.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Because I would imagine, like, as you're going through that period of adjustment from being like super famous, you don't know that it's ending, right? You don't know what the future holds. You don't really know that this is kind of winding down. And so where is the period of letting go where it, like, and that's a lot that kind of is reflective in recovery too. Like, it's like letting go, the party is so, do you know what I'm saying? It's like, that's a surrendering. These are all things we learn in recovery. But how did you feel about the letting go process during?
I was not letting go. I looked at it like a sporting event. I mean, and I held on to it like the football. Like, this is, I'm coveting this thing. I'm not going to let it go. I don't care if you want it. I don't care if you want to kill me. I'm not letting go of this thing called a successful band and a successful band life. And since partying was tied up in that, right? It was tied up in, we're victorious, we're winning, we're accomplishing, then they went together. So as long as, and now a pattern develops, and I guess the guys realized, and some of my family realized after a time, that we would come home off the road and I would still drink, why would I stop drinking? I felt like when I stopped drinking, my body had these changes I didn't like. It was like almost like a flu. It was like a cold, because I was drinking every night for long periods. And what I'd realized later, it's called detoxing. It's a medical problem.
And I just thought, dependent.
I didn't know. I was clueless about that. So they found out I would come home, and, I had a wife at the time and we were starting a family, but, she liked to socialize and I did. And nothing better than being on the road and coming home and celebrating with the friends you haven't seen in a while. Any excuse I could to have another little party, I was taking that opportunity. And people started getting concerned. Yeah, they're like, why is he partying so much? Their interventions eventually start with, why I'm hanging around people that they don't know on the road. They're called drug dealers, and I'm going strange places because the people around me and the band and the crew, eventually none of them can party like I do. I have to start a little earlier and I want to go a little later. And when you can't find the right people, what do? You go find the right people. And by that time I was, in full addiction too. I think physically and mentally, I couldn't tear myself away from the idea that drinking was a problem or that I had to let it go. I was in that denial for several years. I had found out one time a couple of the crew members were trying to do an intervention on me, and I heard them whispering about some guy they were concerned about. And I thought, wow, I need to listen in here, because maybe they're talking about one of the other crew guys. And if he's got a problem, and they're talking about his prone to temper tantrums and hanging out with weird people and staying up too late. I said, I got to find out who this is. So I'm the boss here. And I found out they were talking about me. And I was crushed. I was just devastated that, oh my gosh, they think I'm out of control. And maybe I had an intuition that I was, because my reaction to this was not like a normal person who might say, gosh, guys, I'm sorry that I've scared you and caused you anxiety, and I'm a liability out here, even though I'm one of the bosses. Instead, as an addict, what do? I make a commitment to hide that better. I gotta do this better. I gotta make sure they don't know what I'm doing. And so I started isolating, hanging out more by myself in my hotel room or with other groups. And, there were signs. I guess that is one of the signs that you might have a problem if you're having to hide it from people, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm starting to hide a lot of my life from people, including my family.
Yeah, that's always a sign of shame too, the hiding and not being able to be honest and be forthcoming about who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah.
So how did you transition into finding recovery?
Well, eventually, as 2003 rolls in, and my wife has our second child, so we've got two little kids at home, and it's clear that my road life and my family life are not playing well. They don't work right. I've got to stay up late. I'm addicted to another drug called cocaine. I've got alcohol I can't live without, and it's just all creeping in. And so as they're about to do a big intervention on me, I come to my bottom. I have a sort of I call it a spiritual experience, because I can't explain all of it. I was, you get used to getting intervened by adults who gather around you and tell you they love you and that they're worried about you. And
So you had like the legit intervention, like,
yeah, so I kind of knew what that looked like and felt like.
yeah.
I'd never had a group circle up around me, but I'd had a bunch of individual ones. Well,
Okay.
I get my last intervention, which comes from an unlikely source, and it's my 4-year-old daughter. And, I had built a studio behind our home. It was detached. And so I would go out there late night after the kids had gone to bed and make music and drink. And, it was a Saturday night, and I hadn't made it back into the house. Here I've got, a wife and 2 kids in the house, and I'm too obsessed with partying that I end up passing out on the couch in the studio. And she comes out the next morning, and she says basically one sentence to me that sort of did something different to me that day. She says, "Dad, what are you doing?" And I was on the couch, sort of passed out. I was wearing the same clothes that I was wearing the night before when she saw me last, when I read her goodnight story. And I probably smelled like a still. And she was frustrated that I wasn't really answering. She said, "Dad, what are you doing?" And I know in hindsight, she just meant it as a pure 4-year-old, right? Why aren't you in the house with mom and everybody having pancakes and watching Mickey Mouse? What are you doing out here? She just wanted to know. And I always had an answer. It's not hard to make up some BS excuse for a 4-year-old. And I was always doing it. And on this day, that something moves in me, and I'm not saying anything. I'm not answering her. I've either run out of lies, or there's some power that's shutting me up. And she gets frustrated and runs back in the house. And I kind of sat there on the edge of the couch, rubbed my head and just said, "Oh my God, like, what am I doing?" And she asked the question that I think was probably coming from some higher power, that I think that higher power was asking me to answer. And I sort of admitted to myself, and whatever God was listening, I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not in control. I pretty much have a strong intuition. It's drugs and alcohol that are ruining me. and what am I going to do about it? And the only attachment to the next step was that I had a phone number on a piece of paper that somebody had given me numerous times and said, hey, if you ever want to change, if you ever want some help, if you've ever been given a phone number from someone that's changed their lives, you never want it until you're ready. And that day I was ready. I grabbed that number and I called the guy on the other line and said, take me to wherever you've been going, because I know you've changed your life. I know you've got a new thing going on. I don't see you in the bars anymore. I don't see you partying. You look a little better. Your skin tone is back. And I didn't have anything. I mean, at that point I was desperate, and maybe it was that gift of desperation that made me make the call. And, he got me on that same day in front of a group of 12 steppers that, and I began to hear their powerful stories. It was what I needed to do, is get in front of some people that had my same problem, but they had a solution. And that power of transparency that I heard in that first group of people, where I heard them sharing about all the things they'd forfeited, a spouse, a job, a driver's license, and it was all to drinking. They were telling this story that was like mine. I was about to lose all these things, but they had this solution. They were talking about these steps, and they were talking about a higher power, and none of it pushed me away. I was more intrigued than I was, like some people get. They're a little leery of, wow, talking about God, or they're, I got to do this stuff. I got to get a sponsor. I was like wholly intrigued, and I trusted the group of people sitting in that room that first night. So when they said, keep coming back, try not to drink tomorrow, because of course I was drunk at my first meeting. I couldn't not drink that day. I made the call to my buddy to say, take me to wherever you go. But about an hour later, I started panicking, like, oh my gosh, this might be, that last night might have been my last night drinking. If they tell me I'm an alcoholic, or if they find me out, I might have to quit. So I did what an alcoholic does. You reach for the bottle. So I started drinking
one last party.
Day. Yeah, one more. I mean, honestly, that's probably what I was thinking. And he brought me in there. I did my best. I brushed my teeth twice and chewed some gum. But, I looked now with a few almost decades behind me, I could spot me from a mile away. I had my long blonde hair tied up in a little tie, and it was shoved up under a baseball cap, because I'm sure you could see it coming out. I had sunglasses on, and it was 7:00 at night in the winter. It's not exactly like I needed sunglasses, and I'm sure I smelled like a bottle of tequila or bourbon. So I thought I was so you were
hiding it well, like incognito.
Camouflaged. Yeah. I noticed the guy next to me kept turning his head slowly, like this. He was probably taking a whiff. He's like, oh, we got a live one here.
But they were kind to you.
That's part of why I came back. They told me what I felt was an accurate appraisal of my problem, because it was their problem too. They told me there was a solution. They told me the steps to get there, and they were so friendly and endearing. And when they said, come back tomorrow, I felt like they meant it. I felt like they wanted me back. It wasn't like some put on. And I kind of got home and said, man, I think I'd be an idiot not to at least try this again. And that desire to go home and start drinking again was sort of stolen as well, which I thought was interesting. That was nothing I had the power to do before that day. I could, 8:00 at night, I would be drinking on any night of the week. And so I had, a couple of things happening that I couldn't explain. I wasn't able to respond to my daughter to make an excuse like I normally would. I called someone for help, which was not in my nature at all. That is what I was in denial of. I didn't want to have to ask somebody else for help. I didn't want to admit that Mr. Hootie and the Blowfish with the cool hair and the rock star status needed help from other people. I just didn't want to be that guy. So these things were all happening, and they were overwhelming. So I went back again.
You went back again. That's amazing. Were you in that place or did you have that experience where you wanted to quit and you couldn't?
I've caught myself like talking with other recoverers, wanting to say, I didn't know how to quit, or I wanted to quit. But the more I look back, I didn't. I wanted an answer. I wanted the consequences to stop. I wanted someone to tell me it was going to be okay. No one was telling me that. Everyone that talked to me was telling me, you're acting like an idiot and we're scared and we
Oh,
think you're drinking too much. I didn't have anybody in my court, even the ones that loved me. My first wife, who we later divorced, but my friends in the band and the crew, they all loved me. I don't doubt they loved
yeah,
me, but
yeah,
none of them could tell me the thing that I needed to hear. And I wouldn't really hear it until I got in front of some recoverers.
yeah, yeah. It's amazing when you hear your own story coming out of other people's mouths, like how like shocking, but how connecting that can feel as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's the connection that we know, is that we get in front of people that we can trust. I don't think I was ever going to trust the interventions coming from people that maybe still drank, or
Right.
not
No
even to
credibility
excess, but
there.
just that used marijuana or used alcohol regularly. There's a reason that that the steps talk about getting sponsorship and guidance from someone who's been through it. Is
Yeah.
just an alcoholic, especially, who has fears and doubts and delusions at the deepest level, needs to hear from somebody they can trust. And
Well,
that's
there's credibility coming from somebody who has been there and is abstinent. Like
yeah,
there's some credibility there. Like I can't hear from people who are telling me what I should be doing when they're not doing it themselves. Like there's
yeah.
no credibility there.
No, so I trusted it, and I'm thankful that there was a high level of trust. No one was on my back. They were
Yeah.
just and they were encouraging
Yeah.
when it came down to it. And of course, they were encouraging me to do something I hadn't ever wanted to do, which was start with abstinency and
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah.
And but I trusted, and I did my best. I sort of went 70 some days. I went to meet with people every day they suggested going to 90 days,
90. Yeah.
and I could not make it. I was enjoying what I was hearing from other people. I was
Uh,
enjoying 60 minutes a day of
yeah.
other people's peace and serenity. But
Yeah.
I hadn't really gotten a sponsor I was calling. I hadn't really started reading the literature. I was just enjoying that 60 minutes a day and
Right.
bragging to my friends that, ooh, I'm sober. I'm 32 days sober. Pat me on the back. I was
Yeah.
really looking for
That is
attention
kind of a
there.
big deal, but it is important to celebrate the wins. But when did you start actually, and by the way, the 90 is a suggestion, like all these things that we here to do
Yeah.
are suggestions. But when did you like get a sponsor and start working steps?
Well, I you know, tried this guy at the beginning, from the very beginning, pretty quick, but I never was going to call him. They said get a sponsor, so I did, but I never bothered calling the guy. He said read the first 164 pages of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and I thought I'm just gonna do this my way. I think I'm gonna go to
How did
meetings,
that
hang
go?
out, meet some people,
Yeah.
brag about my sobriety, pick up chips, and it landed me in a relapse. And so
Oh
when I
yeah.
came back and realized I really wasn't doing the whole program, I was,
Right.
giving it a little bit of lip service. Somebody set me up with a sponsor, and I wanted it at that point. The relapse sort of maybe is what I needed, a little kick in the butt, and
For sure.
a humbling is what I felt,
Mhm.
as I went back in front of my group and said I got to start all over. And it's the ego deflation that I needed. I needed to
Yeah.
be deflated in that way. So we started working, and he got me rolling into doing the 12 steps. And the 12-step model was something I was eager to do. I was slow. I wasn't like zipping through it, but I knew that.
Slow is the way to go,
Yeah, I
actually.
mean, if it's going to be your path, and if you're not purposefully delaying, then it doesn't matter how fast you go. But
Right.
you got to be the point of it all is to grow along spiritual lines. And I
Yeah.
was doing that slowly. I didn't want to go to a rehab. I didn't want to make the band like stop touring so I could go do something. I went to meetings on the road. I
Okay.
enjoyed being a special visitor in a lot of group settings. I liked that, and I was pretty diligent. But eventually, probably a year and a half, we finished the steps up, and it was a big weight off my shoulders. The steps that are put there for a reason, in an order where you confess who you are, your powerlessness, and you try and work with a higher power to discover who you are and do a real thorough inventory. And it's nothing short of discovering who you are. On my fourth and fifth step, I discovered as a 40-year-old man how full of it I was. I discovered how many secrets I was keeping, and I learned so much that was that valuable. I had some skills, but I had a lot of flaws, and I had to really look at these limitations and these weaknesses, and allow them to have some value. To say, this is who I am, and I can change, but I've got to acknowledge that this is who I have been. And so, I moved on through there and went out and did the amends as I was supposed to do. And, by the end of it all, I'm feeling like a new person. I'm not looking back over my shoulder. I've got a relationship with a God of my understanding, which was not a mean, wrathful God that I was running from before. You said at the beginning of this, there's a couple reasons that we might drink. And to me, it's you're either running to something or from something, and I was partially running from some old God that intimidated me and I didn't like, and I needed to develop something new. And so I did. And by the end of the steps anyway, which I realized was not a place where you get a medal or an award or anything, but another little signification that you went 365 whole days. By the end of that, I was thinking, this is something wonderful to continue in. I had some clear space in my head. I had a little bit of the respect of my friends and family back, and life was still going to hand me some difficulties because, life still happens. We suffer, there's death, there's divorce, there's a lot of things you can and can't control. And I had to face those things, but doing it sober was becoming a lot easier than trying to do it by dodging and hiding and drinking my way through it.
Right. I want to take you back to the 4-step. For those that don't know, it's a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And it's structured in such a way that it sort of opens the door with acknowledging resentments. And, I was, when I was going to meetings, I would hear people, they would do steps 1, 2, and 3, and then relapse and 4, because the 4th step seemed so hard. And I had a really interesting experience with that I was like, oh my God, it's like a license to complain and bitch to somebody who was like a captive audience. Like, this gal was going to listen to every single one of my, like, all these, I had a list of people who did me wrong, and she had to listen to everything I had to say. And so I had maybe a different take on it. But getting that out and having my feelings validated by somebody was huge for me. But then that's not the end of it, right? It's like, you have to really look at how you were, like, she had me get very specific about the causes, like really specific. And then how that specific thing affected me, whether it was like, like what kind of fear was underneath all these, like my self-esteem was affected, financial security, emotional. So, like, I saw for the first time that my self-esteem had taken hit after hit after hit. It's like, well, no wonder I drank. My self-esteem was so low, I couldn't bear the pain of it. So I had, I was drinking, and it was like totally disconnected. But then the magical part was finding out what my part was in it, because that's when the patterns were revealed. And that's when that's when it became clear where I could take responsibility and where I could let go of things. What was your experience with, doing the actual homework part of it like for you?
Well, it was similar. We're trying to be thorough and figure out what our grudges are on the inside and what our resentments are. And I had the best description that helped me to see it clearly was the idea of the storehouse. Any good business that wants to stay in business has to look at the value of everything in their storehouse, or the things that they have on the floor of their store. Are they goods that are salable? Are they broken? Are they defective? Are they out of date? Or are they good quality items? And when you discover and you look at your life that way, and your emotions and your resentments, whether they're towards people that may have hurt you, or maybe the other ones towards ourselves, which I had a lot of. I had the shame and guilt. We have to give each of these a value. And that's what the inventory does, is that it allows us to write it out. And a good sponsor, like you said, it absolutely makes you get down to the root, because what's the point of shaving off the top? You've got to get down and figure out what the causes and conditions are. And so my sponsor was doing that too. And we got to get down. And what happened was, I saw that I was taking some pretty decent God-given traits and warping them, whether it was, and then I would get, mainly for me, I would, through my self-centeredness, be affected by pride and fear. I was, didn't want you to know who I was, so I was going to put on some facade. I didn't want you to know what I'd done, so I would lie about it. I was living this whole false sort of life, and to understand that and to say, it's okay. We're all human. It was more of just welcoming me to the human race, because I had not only all these flaws I was trying to hide, but I had notoriety. This whole Hootie thing and television and video and awards, that doesn't do anything but make you feel like you're bulletproof. And so, while none of that fame and fortune caused me to drink, it allowed me to hide and camouflage a lot of my flaws that I was practicing. So here I do the fourth step, and I've got everything listed out, and I can see who I was mad at, and what did I do when I was mad at this person. And usually it was not about my problems. I had problems like you. I had problems like people who aren't even alcoholics, but my problem was my solutions. I didn't have the good answer to fix the emotional problems I was having, or how to deal with fear, how to deal with doubt, how to deal with insecurity, or when my ambitions are challenged, all those things. So what I got were better solutions in the end. And that's all the inventory does. It says, hey, this way of thinking is out. We got to replace our old ideas with a lot of new ideas, which some people don't like. That's why they push away. No, they think, I got it. We try and solve so many things. I tried to solve things in my last 5 years of drinking, in between my ears, thinking I can think my way through this, right? I'm educated, I'm successful, I can do this. But in reality, it was just a lot of things I wanted you to believe about me, and maybe a lot of things I wanted to believe about myself.
Sure.
But that's what we convince ourselves of in our heads. But when you write them down, they just become so much more real and true. There they are. This is what I did to this person, and here's what they did to me as a result. And what is the core of it? What's the root? And so, God, what a miracle! And it's still the greatest choice maybe I've made in my adult life, was to follow through and do that with a sponsor, because I learned who I am. I learned not just some of my strengths. We all kind of know our strengths, I think, more inherently. I learned basically my failures, my weaknesses, and my limitations. And that's the obstacle course, right? What's more valuable than to maybe to see the things ahead of time that you're going to stumble over. And so that's what I discovered in my fourth step, is I could see those things where I was getting off track, and I could do better.
That is such an interesting idea. One of the criticisms I hear about 12 step is that it's hyper focused on, like, character defects, as they're called. And I think it's so important to be clear about what they are, because like you said, we tend to focus on our assets more, like, oh, we got this, I'm fine. Like, this isn't, like, we're in denial of what the problems are. So it's really good to be clear about what the problems are. I think for a lot of people too, though, that they're so ashamed about their behavior and who they've hurt, that it's so tempting to sort of go in that downward spiral. Did you have somebody in your life, was your sponsor one of those that could sort of hold the parameters for you and not let you get too low or get too high? Like, did you receive a lot of compassion for your, survival skills, really, that were not working for you anymore?
Yeah, he was very fair. He also had a good sense of humor, and he recognized that I was, though extremely sensitive, that he could talk to me in a certain way. So he would point out things and kind of jab at me, not just to make fun of me, but to have humor and to point out how dumb some of my ideas were, really. He would say, like, well, how's that going? I'd explain my big drama. They're doing this and they're doing this and they're doing that. He'd say, and now he would say, how would you respond? And I would tell him how I responded, which was usually a bad response. He'd say, well, how's that going for you? Like,
he didn't have to say anything.
Yeah, that's all. So that's a nice way of communicating, to say,
yeah, that is.
Let's look at how your response is working. And that's all it was. My, like I said, I had all these problems that were not that different than anyone's, but my solutions were just nil. So he was honest, he was fair. He encouraged me like a sponsor should, to say, hey, you obviously have the ability to love. You have the ability to work hard and to make friends. You have these things. You've just, like I said, warped them a little bit, twisted them, and they've gotten all tangled up. And we're just trying to untangle up some things that are already there so they can work the way they're supposed to.
Yeah. Did you find through this process, like they say that you learn about yourself, right? Like the why behind some of the actions. And did you find that you found out like some of the good parts about you too? Like it's important to find out like where are we disillusioned or delusional, I should say. Was there anything that surprised you when you learned about yourself?
Well, I think I knew before I discovered the things. I was reading enough to know that all of the problems that I could never deal with and didn't really have the answer yet, all of them had answers. So I felt the confidence. So even reading some of the literature that is out there available, besides the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, but the 12 steps and the 12 traditions, which the founder, Bill Wilson, wrote over the course of the next sort of 6 to 8 years. It talks about the different ways that we twist natural gifts. And that even before I'd untwisted mine, I felt like I could see these examples of people who had performed real love or had an ability to try and understand others, to had empathy, had sympathy, had all these things, and they'd just gotten twisted. So I knew for me, it wasn't that I didn't have any gifts or any goodness in me. I knew I had a heart for philanthropy. I had a heart for community. To me, it was untangling, detangling the mess that, I had made through a lot of years of bad decisions and regrets. So yeah, I felt like I had, and I saw, it's evidence. I look around at the people that are in recovery and their lives are changing and getting better and they're transforming themselves. I think that can be me. I trusted, like, hey, we're all screwed up. I see guys that are, that I get sober with that have said they've been homeless, they've been jobless, they've been incarcerated, and they have great lives. They have families now, they have paychecks, they have peace mainly. And I thought, yeah, that's available to me. And to me, it was, they didn't really need to sell me on it. And I didn't have to dig too deep to know that I had a few good traits. I just had to look and see the evidence out there. And, that's what I try to be for other people is, evidence. Hey, we're supposed to, it's not so much what I say. It was my problem. I used to think that my mouth would get me out of trouble. My mouth could convince people of how great I was or how legit I was. And my sponsor, again, with his little smart aleck tone, would let me know when people wouldn't believe me or they wouldn't trust me and they wouldn't allow me to do certain things because they didn't trust me. I was convincing them with my words. He's like, how's that going for you? You to convince them with your actions because they don't believe you anymore. We cause a lot of damage and we don't realize it sometimes that we can't talk our way out of it. We can, start living a different life. People will see it. They might be inspired. They might even offer forgiveness, but Nothing out there is guaranteed to change, but if we do the steps, we will.
Yeah, absolutely. With the few minutes that we have left, I'm so curious. I have found that when people, start a 12-step journey, where we end up is with our belief in a higher power is, where we end up is not where we start. I'm just curious, how did that process of, coming to grips with a higher power, how did that evolve from where you started to where you are today? What
I
does
think
God
it's,
mean to you?
yeah, I think it's still evolving, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's
They,
good.
I had a, not a strict religious upbringing, but it was a rigid, lane. It was Christian schooling and church on the weekends. And, of course, I didn't like it. As I explained earlier, I was a thrill seeker and a deviant, and I didn't like authority. So I was pushing back all the time. So anything that was sort of higher power, that was the Bible stuff, I was, of course, pushing back on. And so as soon as I got out of the house as an adult, I left that behind. Now I started sensing that I wanted to learn more about why I am here. What are we doing here? How did we get here? And so I dabbled a few times, but it was in getting sober that it was suggested that, I need to have a higher power, a power of my understanding. And that to me means not just that I understand, but that I can communicate and understand with. In other words, like, not something that's just mysterious. It's easy to say, oh, this God of mystery, it's too big to understand. Well, that doesn't help me as much down here on earth. I want some solutions. I want a God
Yes.
that is something a little more tangible, I guess. So I've been sober 18 years, and as much as the program and the 12-step model has served me, and it's quite simple, it's not complex, it's pragmatic. Even in that, I've chased around God concepts all the way during that period. So it's we all have that thing. We want to know what we're doing here and where we're going. It's what man does, and it's not wrong. And there are some great solutions to having some peace within that, in case you're not sure where you're going or where you came from. And then there's other lanes that say, we definitively know where we came from, and we're going to tell you where you're going if you're not sure. And so somewhere in there, I've, modeled something that gives me peace. I just want to have peace. And, what the gift of peace is available when you love others. That's just all there is to it. And to love others in a good way, I need to understand who I am and how I work, because I'm self-centered by nature, and I need to realize that I need to fight against that. I've got to be others-centered. I've got to find some humility. I've got to serve. Otherwise, I just get caught in trying to please myself. So maybe in the end, the power for me is that I know the solution to not sinking under my own weight, which is what I'm likely to do when I serve myself. The solution is serve others. And so in the steps, they point us that way. They say, once you think you got this and you figured out who you are, and you realize you're powerless, and you make some amends to people, bring that message out there with your action. You don't even need words. And that's biblical to say, let your actions speak for themselves. Don't try and speak it out there. So I just try and live the life that was so freely given to me. I was begging and pleading and lost and embarrassed and humbled at the doors of my first 12-step group. They took me in. They said, come back. You need a ride? We'll give you a ride. You want to know our experience and our strength and our hope? We'll give it to you all day. We'll give you our time, which is the most valuable thing anyone can give away. So I've learned, if I really want to have peace and I want to get out of myself, I need to be giving time to newcomers. So that's what I try and do.
No, that's beautiful. Well, listen, I really appreciate your time today. I think it's so helpful to hear, stories from other people that have been through this as well. So if people are looking to connect with you or learn more about, I know you re-release some music. I mean, you got a book, you got a lot going on. What's the best way for people to learn more about you or connect with you?
Well, I'd like to post regularly on my Facebook page and on Instagram as well. And it's a lot of the messaging that has been given to me. I make music that's positive. Some of it is more specifically Christian, but a lot of it is just hopeful, positive celebration of the life that we have. And I'm done with writing old songs about the pain of relationships and heartbreak and heartache and
That's
failure.
enough is enough.
Right. I've done that. So I think I prefer to lean into the positive and let people see that. So yeah, I post a lot, and my music's on wherever you stream, Spotify and Apple, and there's a lot of places to get it. But I'm still with my band. The blessing is I salvaged relationships through the 12-step model. I salvaged my band.
That's amazing.
And we've taken a long dormancy back in the mid 2000s and did a great reunion tour in 2019. And we just announced we're doing another one in 2024. So I hope to meet a lot of people out there and stay in the recovery community, even as we're driving around the country in buses.
Well, if you ever get out to the Boise area, you'll have to let me know. I'll keep an eye on your tour schedule.
Look for us in Salt Lake. I'm pretty sure we'll be in Denver as well. We're getting out west for sure.
Awesome. Well, listen, it was such a pleasure to spend some time with you and hear more about your story. Just thank you so much for all the work that you're doing.
Thanks so much. God bless. Talk to you later.
All right. Thanks. Bye.